Hello and welcome to Legalbytes. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. We don't give legal advice, but we do talk about how the law works and try to look into our crystal ball to see how things might turn out. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, we'd love it if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, all the great YouTube-y stuff. And if you want to listen while out and about, we're now offering our live streams in podcast form where you can leave a rating and review. Links are in the description below, as well as to our clips channel where you can find some of the best clips taken from our live streams. Otherwise, if you want to catch me elsewhere, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so on Locals, Patreon, or by becoming a YouTube member, or by buying some really awesome Legalbytes merch. Again, all links are in the description below. And with that said, let's get into it. Hello, hello. We are so not late. Can you guys imagine? I started this like right immediately at noon EST, and I have to say I'm pretty proud of myself. Although the thing that I'm not exactly proud of myself for is the fact that I forgot to put the links in the description for all the stuff that is mentioned in the in that intro. So give me just 1 second and I'm going to add these in there so that people can actually see them. And then we will get moving. Just talk amongst yourselves. All right. Like I have this whole list of things that I have to do every time I set up a live stream. And that's one of them is to add all that stuff. And boom, done. Okay, cool. So, how's everybody doing today? Happy Wednesday. Happy middle of the weekday. Things are going pretty well. Not so well for Alec Baldwin, though. Not so well for some other people, I think. A lot of people that are named as defendants in this lawsuit. I'm a little excited to go over it, which sounds bad because there's some real misfortune for a lot of people, but I know that there's a lot of interest out there for this lawsuit. This whole case has just been so fascinating, and it has been increasingly fascinating because of a lot of the things that Alec Baldwin has been doing by going and talking to George Stephanopoulos, going on Instagram, talking to people on the side of the road, all kinds of things that his legal team is probably not so happy about. And especially now that there actually is a lawsuit, and it's times like this. Like we all pretty much saw this coming, right? So we did. Andy, hey, happy V16. Andy's referring to what is called Vasara Šešiolikta, which stands for or means February 16th in Lithuanian. Today is Lithuanian Independence Day. So the first one, I should say, it's the one that established Lithuania as a republic in 1918. So happy V16 to you too, Andy. And thanks for the super chat. So, okay. So there is a question in the chat about was the family waiting to see what came out first? For example, other lawsuits. I think that the reason why. Oh, hey Hogue. Hey Rick, how's it going? Good to see you too. So I think that the reason why it kind of took them some time, which they're well within the statute of limitations to file this kind of a lawsuit. I mean, usually you've got 2 or 3 years for something like this. But I think that the reason why they took some time on this was because they were waiting for the criminal investigation. They were waiting for, any other information to be gathered. So I think that they probably decided that there's been enough that's been gathered. They know that there is, that there's enough information out there. I think Alec Baldwin has certainly helped with
uh, with this whole situation for the Hutchins family, because he's supplied plenty of information through his various interviews that he's given, or interviews or statements, I guess you could say, that he's made to the public. So anyhow, we can probably get right into it. I guess first, before we pull up the complaint itself, for anyone that is unfamiliar with this case, what happened back in October was Alec Baldwin was on the set of Rust, the movie, which was a low budget indie film being shot in New Mexico. And I guess this was just this seems to be common um for these kinds of indie films that um and speaking of indie, thanks Cherokee Girl for the super chat. um Indy is right there, and I'm sure she will totally appreciate it when I use that on some treats for her. For these kinds of independent films, it's not uncommon for things to be rushed, for things to be sort of drawn on a shoestring, so to speak, because people are trying to make the most out of every little bit that is allocated towards the budget for this kind of a film. So I think, anyhow, but so what happened here was, apparently it was, despite its low budget, it was a very, gun intensive film. And anyhow, so it was a very low budget film, but with a lot of guns. And so when you have a situation like that, we are talking about safety issues that may or may not be properly covered. And it turns out that this film was incredibly rushed. It was incredibly, um, you could say, stretched thin in terms of the people that were working on set for these kinds of roles, for the props, for the armorer, things like that. Apparently the armorer was working multiple roles, which is not, I guess, not typical, or I guess not, you could say, not up to industry standards, I guess. So anyhow, when they were rehearsing for a scene, he pulled out the firearm that he was using for the scene, and the gun went off, and the director, Joel Souza, was hit, but not before it passed through the cinematographer, Halyna Hutchins. So that's the background there. We have one person that was injured, one person that died. In this particular lawsuit, we're not talking about Joel Souza. We are just talking about Halyna Hutchins. And the lawsuit has been brought by her family, so her husband, or I guess widower, sorry, and her son, as well as a personal representative who filed in New Mexico recently to be the personal representative in this case. Now, what does that mean? So at the end of January, it was reported that there was a filing in New Mexico by an attorney that is close to the family to be the personal representative for the purposes of a wrongful death action. So that is basically, so this person will be suing to represent the estate of Halyna Hutchins. And then you have the husband and the son that are also suing on their own behalf. So what you'll see when I pull up the complaint, you'll see that there is a wrongful death, negligence, or intentional or reckless action. And then at the same time, there is also going to be a cause of action for what's called loss of consortium. Basically, that means the loss of comfort and relationship with that person. So that is a direct loss by the husband and by the son. Traditionally, that is a cause of action that would be brought by a spouse, because it's kind of awkward to talk about, but it's a big part of it is loss of intimate relationships between two spouses. So you can have it in a wrongful death claim, but you can also have it in a personal injury claim where the injury is so bad that they essentially cannot have certain types of relationships with their spouse. But now over time, what's happened is it's sort of expanded Hogue said loss of consortium on the husband's side, relations in the biblical sense. Yes. But since the traditional days, I guess, it has expanded to in a lot of states, I should say, not in every state, but in a lot of states, it's expanded to the direct family, including children, minor children, or parents can claim the loss of consortium in some states for a minor child as well, because they're talking about a close relationship, a close, maybe not the same type of relationship with a spouse, but anyhow, and New Mexico is one of those states that does allow for a minor child to claim loss of consortium from a parent that has either died or been very, very, very injured. So let's pull this up. Okay, here is the complaint. As you can see, there are a lot of people and businesses that have been sued by the family of Halyna Hutchins. Now, don't be fooled. A lot of this is focusing on Alec Baldwin. But they are definitely going after a lot of people that are not just Alec Baldwin, not just the armorer Halyna Hutchins, not just the assistant director, but also people that are various producers, various other prop people, things of that nature. Some other people that have kind of come up in some of the live streams that we've talked about in this case with other lawsuits that have been filed. For example, the one that was filed by not Halyna Hutchins, by Hannah Gutierrez, against other various individuals that I don't know if you guys remember, if you saw that live stream on this channel by Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. It wasn't that great. It was kind of a nothing burger, but it just seemed a lot more like it was just her getting her statement out, so to speak, in a way that's safer than the way that Alec Baldwin has done so. Because he's just sort of like rambling off on his own and not having things checked by legal, it seems like. So anyhow, let's go through. I'm going to first go through kind of who is like the who's who of this lawsuit so that you guys can get an understanding. So we obviously have Halyna Hutchins, who was 42 years old. Then we've got her husband, or her widower, Matthew Hutchins, her son Andros, and then plaintiff Christina Martinez, who is the New Mexico attorney, who is the legally appointed personal representative. So that's the person that is essentially taking on the role of Halyna Hutchins and sort of representing her estate, because when it comes to the administration of her estate, she might have a trust, she might not have a trust. So maybe she has a probate action that's been opened up in California, because that is where she lived, or at least was domiciled at the time of her death. But most likely, my guess, since we haven't heard any kind of reporting about a probate being opened in this case, my guess is that she probably had some kind of a trust. But even though you have a trust, and this is something that some people have asked me before also, is when you do set up a trust, does that completely eliminate the need for probate? And my answer is not necessarily. And this is an example, because this is a situation where you have funds that would be coming in, even though it's after someone's death, it's coming in that's not part of the trust yet. So you have to have you have to have a way of getting those funds into the trust. So there may be some probate action in California, but at the very least we have a situation here where we have somebody that is representing the estate in some fashion for the purpose of getting those funds to the estate for the purposes of administration. So anyhow, so that's who plaintiff Christina Martinez is. So those are the three plaintiffs here. We've got husband, son, and lawyer representing the estate. And and yes, Rick, YouTube comments, not legal advice. Same thing goes obviously with anything that I'm saying on this live stream. Everything, of course, is strictly educational. So anyhow, so then we go on to the actual defendants. Now we've got defendant Alexander Baldwin III. That's Alec Baldwin. I didn't actually realize that Alec was not his first name. legally. But anyway, now we know. So we've got that. We've got him. We've got his production company, Eldorado Pictures. Then we've got Rust Movie Productions LLC, which was another company that was, I guess, set up for the Rust movie production. And then we've got defendant Ryan Donnell Smith. That's also a producer for the Rust production company. Then we've got Langley Allen Cheney. That's also a producer. Defendant Thomasville Pictures LLC. That's another production company that was kind of set up for this whole project. Then we've got Nathan Klinger, another producer. Ryan Winterstein, another producer. Defendant Short Porch Pictures LLC. That's another production company. Angel Nigam. I hope that I'm pronouncing this correctly. And Brittany House Pictures, which is, it's interesting because this is one business that they were not able to find what form it took, which is fine because you can say that when you're drafting a complaint, because you can say, I know that this company exists. I don't know exactly all of the information about it, but we'll find out more in discovery and after these entities and people and whatnot have been served. As we get more information, we can always update, basically. So you pretty much, when you're drafting a complaint, you don't have to have all of the answers. You just kind of give the best answers that you can. And this actually so far is pretty good because they have a lot of information about these different production companies. They kind of know where they're from for the most part. They know that these are either from the defendants that are from County of Los Angeles, California. You've got these other production companies that are, doing business in the County of Los Angeles, California, another LLC that was set up specifically for New Mexico. So this so far looks like they've in their time that they've taken before filing this complaint, they've really been doing a lot of investigating, it seems like, to really get who all should be part of this lawsuit. So then we've got Matthew Del Piano, another producer, Calvary Media Inc., another production company, Ryan Dennett Smith, a unit production manager, which they don't define until a little bit down here because there is another defendant, Catherine Walters, that's another unit production manager, which is generally responsible for the film's budget, the film schedule, and the general administration of the production. So that kind of even though we haven't gotten into the facts that they are alleging yet in this complaint, but just by looking at who it is that they have added into this complaint, we can start to see that what they're going to be alleging is that the budget was an issue, the schedule was an issue, general administration of the production was leading to what happened. So you can kind of start to get a sense, even just by looking at who it is that they have named in this complaint as defendants. You've got defendant Gabriel Pickle, who's a line producer, generally responsible for managing the budget and overseeing all operations and logistics for a film from pre-production to post-production, reporting directly to the producers and executive producers. So there you've got also somebody who is a link between what's going on set and then the producers. So you've got kind of this chain of command almost, that they are identifying all of these individuals to say, these people had communications with these people and those people had communications with those people. So everybody should have had this information, and we can find out exactly from what each individual knew and which company they represented, which production company they represented here in their actions, in their duties. And so that they can link to each of these individuals and each of these companies. And basically, I mean, part of it really is whose pockets can we take from in this kind of a lawsuit when we are getting assigning responsibility from people. So moving down, then we see Defendant Third Shift Media LLC. That is, I think, another. Oh, they contracted with another production company. Defendant Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. We are familiar with her. She's the armorer for the Rust production set. And so she was, we know a lot about her at this point and what her responsibilities are. Defendant Sarah Zachary. Now, she was also mentioned in the Hannah Gutierrez lawsuit, the civil lawsuit that she filed, because Sarah Zachary was the props master. And I believe she was the one that had some sort of I guess a tussle with Hannah Gutierrez-Reed on set. And so it'll be interesting to see all of the drama that we kind of learned about in that other lawsuit coming up in this one. Defendant Seth Kenny was also mentioned in Hannah Gutierrez's lawsuit. He's the I guess the armorer assistant and or the armorer mentor. And he also owns the defendant PDQ Arm and Prop LLC, which was also named in that other lawsuit. Defendant David Halls, the first assistant director. So we know about him as well. Defendant Chris M.B. Sharp, that is an executive producer. Jennifer Lamb, executive producer. We've got some more producers going down the list. Emily Salveson, Streamline Global, which is another production company, or a motion picture development and finance company involved in the rest production. So they really have gone to try to name pretty much everyone that they possibly can. And then, so you guys might be familiar with this, you guys might not, but defendants does 1 through 100. So it's always smart when you are the plaintiff's attorney and you have a lot of people that you're naming and you don't necessarily know if you've gotten everyone, to name defendants does 1 through 100, because then if during discovery you can find out from somebody during a deposition or during, more likely during written discovery from a defendant, to say like, hey, who else was involved in this situation? Who else was involved on set? Who else was responsible? And then they have to give names for who else they worked with, et cetera, et cetera. And then you might want to amend the complaint to add someone to represent, to stand in the shoes of then does 1 through 100. So doe number 1 would be, John Smith or whatever from the production company. So that's why you would have does 1 through 100. So this is everyone that has been listed. I mean, that is a massive list of defendants. Discovery is going to be crazy in this case. And it's yeah, like I said, it's going to be massive. So, but they really are going for pretty much all of the pockets, which is smart. I mean, that's what should happen. In this kind of a case, because there are, when we're talking about a production set, we're not just talking about, so a lot of the focus has been on Alec Baldwin, right? Because he's the one that had the revolver in his hand, and he was the one that pulled back the hammer, and then it went off. Whether or not he pulled the trigger, that's like a big question, right? So, but where was I going with this? So, but we're talking about a movie set, right? So there's a lot of pieces involved here. And when we're talking about things like not just the actual revolver, but then also the situation on set where people were concerned about their safety, cast and crew are concerned about their safety, things like that. We have a lot of people that could potentially be responsible for things like allocating the budget, organizing the budget, hiring different people, managing different people that have been hired, things like that. So there's a lot there. This is potentially a very complicated case in terms of discovery, but the facts themselves are, the core facts obviously are very straightforward. So let's continue on. Okay, so we're going to skip through all of the venue and all that kind of stuff, because we don't need to go over it. I mean, they do talk about how this was a joint venture, and all of the producers and each of the rest production companies, they're responsible for the wrongful conduct of each other and for the death of Miss Hutchins on the rest production. They combined their money, skill, and knowledge. They had an ownership interest in the business. They had joint control. They agreed to share profits and losses. All of that basically is to say, if you hold one person responsible, we're going to hold everybody jointly responsible, because they were all trying to act for the benefit of one another, and all of their liabilities, they all agreed ahead of time that their liabilities would be shared. If this movie flopped and there was a huge debt to be paid out for all of the production costs, if there wasn't enough money to come in to really cover all the costs, that would be shared among all of the different producers and production companies and whatnot. So, and same thing goes for all of the the benefits of running this kind of a production company, right? If it was a banger and it made a ton of money, then they were going to share the profits from it. So basically all of that shows that they were all trying to work together for this whole project, even though they had individual roles maybe. So basically all of that goes to um to um uh to uh um what's the word to alleging that that all of the liability should be shared jointly and severally between them. So Britt Cormier, thanks so much for the super chat. He says that is going to be a lot of motions to dismiss, as each of these defendants will say we were not responsible for this. It was these other companies. So we're going to go through and figure out if this could be subject to a motion to dismiss. But my bet, based on the facts that we do know in this case, and the relationships that we can kind of surmise between all of these different entities and all of these different people, my bet is that there's probably not going to be a motion to dismiss that would be successful in this case. Someone could always file one, of course, to try to find their way out of this lawsuit, to say I was not responsible for for any of these other things. But if the allegations are there, I mean, that's why this paragraph 41 here is pretty important, is to say, hey, the actions of one of these individuals or one of these companies is representative of the actions of all of the others, because of the fact that they were all acting together on this one project. So basically this right here pulls them all in to the behaviors of any of these individuals. So I don't see any of these production companies or other producers that are kind of like more on the outskirts being able to say like, well, I wasn't responsible or I wasn't really involved, because they were involved in the project, and the project involved having a budget and involved having a certain amount of time to film these things like that. So and Britt said, I would say they filed the motions to dismiss to sever just to drive the costs up for the plaintiff. They might, but keep in mind that that may also drive costs up for themselves. So for each of these defendants and for the plaintiffs, I mean, that's one strategy. It's one strategy that one can employ, is to try to, make things as painful as possible for the plaintiff. But I think that in this kind of a case, we talk a lot about the two different kind of courts that are involved in these kinds of cases. Like, and this one is absolutely one of those where there are two courts, right? There's a court of law and the court of public opinion. And Alec Baldwin has been trying to sort of like juggle between those two, it seems like, with all of his various statements that he's been making. But so when you have a case like this that is just so tragic and so many people know about the facts of it and so many people are talking about it, it seems like it would look kind of dirty for someone to try to drive up costs for the grieving family going into a civil lawsuit. So just trying to file a motion to dismiss just for the costs. I mean, yes, that could be a strategy for, to try to, lead to a faster settlement, perhaps. But I don't know. I don't know that that would work, because number one, the facts in this case are fairly strong from what I know of the facts. Now we're going to go through the factual allegations in the complaint and see how well they're drafted. But, from what I do know, I think that this is a fairly strong case for a wrongful death action, right? I mean, number one, we know that she died. Number two, we know that typically firearms on set do not result in the cinematographer or anyone dying, right? So the idea that there is negligence in this case is pretty strong, that someone should be held responsible. The idea for that is pretty strong as well. So the idea that someone would file a motion to dismiss just to drive up costs, I don't know that that would be very successful, partly because of the fact that we are talking about a case that is also, like I said, in the court of public opinion, and people are going to look at that as not terribly favorably. Because, you know, it's a tragic case, and it doesn't look like a situation that is uh where she has probably done something wrong, right? Like if we're talking about a super controversial case where, you know, we're talking about self-defense cases, for example, you know, self-defense criminal cases like Kyle Rittenhouse. Those are controversial because somebody could look at the defendant, or, you know, look at the folks who died and say, you know, you did something wrong, maybe, you know, that kind of situation. But in this kind of a case, it doesn't look like Halyna Hutchins really did anything wrong other than doing her job. Now, that may come out differently in discovery, you know, that there may be some information that we don't know about that just hasn't come out because, you know, it just hasn't come out yet. But maybe something happens, you know, in discovery where she was responsible for, you know, some of the rush. Who knows? I don't know. But that doesn't seem to be apparent at this point. And so I don't see that happening kind of moving forward. So I think that any kind of a motion to dismiss to be filed would be one that somebody is legitimately thinking that there is some level of like some reasonable ability to win, I should say. So let's go back to the motion, or the not the motion to dismiss, the complaint. Okay. So now when we are analyzing a complaint, keep in mind that we are looking at this, we're taking all of the facts as they are alleged as if they are true, because that is what a court does when they are analyzing a motion to dismiss. They are looking at all of the facts that are alleged, and they're saying, okay, here are all of the boxes that need to be checked for each element of each claim, each cause of action that is alleged here. And are there facts that are alleged that check each box? So, and actually, before I go back to that, we are going to do, whoa, what is going on here? Here we go. I don't know why. Okay. Well, that is supposed to say negligence and wrongful death. I don't know why this is cut off here. That's weird. Anyhow, so for a negligence and wrongful death cause of action, there are 4 elements here. We have, you know, any law school 1L who is going into their 2L year has gone through torts, and they understand torts, the class torts, and they understand any kind of a negligence claim. And when we're talking about wrongful death, we're talking about at least negligence, and that's what they have alleged here, is that at least people have been negligent in this particular case, maybe willful, maybe reckless. So we're just going to look at the lowest that they need to show, which would be negligence, and there are 4 elements here. Number 1, did the defendant have a duty of reasonable care to the plaintiff? In this kind of a case, yes. And when we're talking about firearms, yes. Anyone named here is going to have either a duty, like Alec Baldwin, when he was handling the firearm, had a certain duty of reasonable care to handle that in such a way so that it wasn't going to injure someone. As we go into the various producers, the question is going to be, did they have a duty of reasonable care? Now, their responsibilities are going to be probably more on the lines of the budget and the overall schedule of production, and who is being kind of ushering the schedule, and who's overseeing that person ushering the schedule. So with each defendant, we are looking for something like that. Number 2, did the defendant breach that duty? So was Alec Baldwin handling the revolver in such a way so that it went off, that it shouldn't have gone off? Did Alec Baldwin not check the chamber to see if it had a live round versus a blank, or maybe nothing, for example? That's another thing. Did Hannah Gutierrez breach her duty of reasonable care by not insisting on being in there and checking it before anybody else handled it? Things of that nature. So we would look at each defendant would be looking at that. So number 3 would be plaintiff was harmed. That's the easiest one, of course. Yeah, that number 1. So we have 3 different plaintiffs. Remember, number 1, Halyna Hutchins. Of course, she died. Number 2, her husband. Was he harmed by the death of his wife? Of course. Number 3, Andros, Helena's son. Was he harmed by the death of his mother? Of course. Like that's like so. Element number 3, I don't think anyone will be fighting about at all. Number 4, did defendant's breach cause plaintiff's harm? So this is maybe an area where somebody might try to fight this sort of wrongful death action, but so because what we're talking about here is, okay, so maybe there was a budget issue here. And there's some producer that should have been overlooking, the budget. So was the budget really a cause of this issue, or was it something else? Was the rush of the events on production, on set, was that really responsible for what happened? Was that really the cause? Was it foreseeable? Foreseeability is a big thing that defendant will bring up to say it's not foreseeable that just because we had a low budget that this would happen. But then you go into some of the details and you say, okay, well, we had a low budget. That's one thing. But the way that you allocated that low budget so that there was not enough money for safety of these firearms, you allocated the budget in such a way that you had to hire the armorer so that she was fulfilling multiple roles. That's an issue. Who was responsible for that decision? Things of that kind of nature are going to come up. So that is for the wrongful death elements. And loss of consortium, like I mentioned earlier, loss of consortium is when you have a close familial relationship where you have lost some level of intimacy, some level of support. And in New Mexico, they do allow it for not just the widowed spouse, but also for a minor child. So in this case, both Andros and the husband, they both are able to sue for their own loss of consortium. So, you've got the first element is a close familial relationship with the injured at the time of the injury. Number 2, was there a tortious injury to that person? Of course, she died. So yes, number 2 is easy, kind of like element number 3 in that first one. Element number 3 for loss of consortium. Loss of consortium suffered by non-injured spouse, child, parent. Now, this is where this kind of gets a little bit awkward sometimes in these kinds of lawsuits, because especially where we're talking about a spouse, you have to go into the details of their intimate relationship. And this is the part of litigation that gets to be very uncomfortable, because just by the nature of the cause of action, you have to go there. And it's very private, and the plaintiff they have to allow for all kinds of probing questions about the relationship. And they have to answer them because they have put them centrally at issue in this kind of a lawsuit. So for the child, I guess not quite as much, but it's much more about like the closeness of their relationship, with his mom, that she used to be the one to pick him up from school every day, and she would help him with his homework. And then on the weekends, she would, invite him into the kitchen to, bake cupcakes or something, like these kinds of things that not only he was enjoying at the time, leading up to her death, but that would have been expected to continue until his adulthood. So those kinds of things are going to come up now. And then number 4, was the loss proximately caused by defendant's act? So it's kind of like, each defendant is going to have that same sort of causation situation as with the wrongful death claim itself, the negligence claim. So, so that is that. Um, anyhow, those are the elements. Let's go through the facts to see whether or not each of these boxes are going to be met in this particular case. Now, any reasonable inferences are going to be drawn for the plaintiff that is filing this lawsuit. And yeah, let's get into it. Okay. So, factual allegations. We are on page 9 of this complaint. A revolver is a deadly weapon. It is designed to inflict severe bodily harm or death. The defendants chose to use real firearms for the feature film production Rust, a gun-heavy Western film being shot at the Bonanza Creek Ranch near Santa Fe, New Mexico, despite the danger inherent in any use of real firearms. Because firearms are inherently dangerous, the movie industry has adopted clear and strict safety protocols for the use of firearms to ensure that no one ever be injured during the production of a movie. The Rust production was responsible for the safe use of firearms on set and the safety of its cast and crew. Every member of the production, cast and crew alike, was at all times required to follow industry protocols and adhere to basic gun safety rules. Defendants Baldwin, the producers, and the Rust production companies breached the most basic rules of firearm use on a film production. These basic rules for safe gun handling include: always treat the gun as if it were loaded. Now, right here, this so we're at paragraph 44, and there are sub points here. So A through I. These are each going to be basically duties of reasonable care that were present on set. So when we were talking about those 4 elements of negligence, that first element, was there a duty? These are each different duties that have that were present on set that they are alleging were breached. So we're talking about elements 1 and 2 because they're not only identifying them, they are saying that they were actually breached by the defendants. So, okay. So A, always treat the gun as if it were loaded. B, never point the gun at anything the operator of the gun, in this case, Defendant Baldwin, doesn't intend to destroy. C, always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction and never at yourself or anyone else. D, always keep the gun unloaded unless it is absolutely necessary to load the gun for use on a scene. Then and only then, a qualified person acting as the weapons master or armorer should load the gun. Never place a finger on the trigger unless the operator is ready to shoot. F, be sure of the person's target and what is behind it. G, learn the mechanical and handling characteristics of the particular gun being used. H, load the gun in front of the actors or crew who may be in the line of fire. I, personally perform or observe a visual inspection of the gun to ensure no ammunition is contained in the cartridge. So this sounds a lot like general gun safety measures, right? So a lot of people have been talking about how Hollywood seems to have different standards than other normal people, right? And when we were talking about this particular case, there is a possibility that there could be slightly different standards because we are talking about a movie set and we are talking about certain people taking certain responsibilities for these different items, right? So, people know that the armorer is, generally speaking, supposed to be in charge of the in charge of all of the weapons on set. We know that the prop people, generally speaking, are in charge of all of the props. You have this division of roles just so that certain people can be on top of certain responsibilities. Now, when it comes to something like a firearm, the case can definitely be made that every single individual on set that handles that firearm also shares a certain amount of responsibility. And I think that is probably going to be the standard in this particular case. So all of these things are things that anyone is going to hear on pretty much any gun range anywhere, right? Like things like you only point down range. You only, if you point anywhere, you have to know exactly where you're pointing and what is behind anything that you're pointing at. Don't point it at anything you don't intend to destroy. These are very, very common rules that that a lot of people will abide by when they are handling a firearm. So paragraph 45, the rules for Rust Productions' use of the revolver by Defendant Baldwin required training for Defendant Baldwin and the presence on site of an expert in the safe handling of firearms to enforce proper safety protocols and train others in such safety protocols and the safe handling of firearms. The property master or the armorer must instruct the actors on the proper and safe use of the weapons, including the basic safety rules described above, and ensure no dangerous conditions are ever created by firearms. The armorer must be responsible for loading and unloading the firearms and must check the firearms before and after each instance in which they are handled. So this paragraph right here is pointing obviously right at Hannah Gutierrez-Reed and at the assistant director, David Hall, as well as Alec Baldwin as well. So we've got, and the thing is that, even if, let's say Hannah Gutierrez says, well, I wasn't allowed to be there. It wasn't my fault. It was somebody else's fault because of XYZ. Then whoever she's pointing at, could potentially share some liability with her, but she still probably has, at the end of the day, a measure of liability in this particular case because she did have all of those responsibilities. She was the person that was supposed to be loading and unloading the firearms. She was supposed to be the one that was checking everything, making sure everything was safe. That literally is her job on set, right? And the same thing with David Hall. If he's the one that's stepping on her toes so that she can't perform her job, he shares some liability because he stepped into her role for that. So there's, allegedly, assuming that is what comes out in this case, but that's what we understand happened based on the reporting, right? So anyone that has been either stepping into that role that she is responsible for, or that has been preventing her from doing the job that she was supposed to do, that she was tasked to do, that she would have done if the conditions had been safe. Anyone that's responsible for kind of impeding that is also going to share some liability. But none of those things would take away from her responsibility in maintaining the safety of that firearm. And at the same time, I don't see any way that Alec Baldwin gets out of sharing liability here as well, because at the end of the day, he's the one that had the gun in his hand, right? So, all right. The Rust production involved extensive use of firearms and required an experienced firearms expert with the skill and qualifications to maintain constant vigilance for safety matters, notwithstanding the numerous firearms present on the set of Rust and the frequency of their use to fire cartridges in simulated gunfights. Defendant Gutierrez-Reed was an inexperienced weapons master with only one movie production under her belt, unqualified for the degree of skill required on the Rust set. So that points to not just her, but whoever hired her. So who's responsible for hiring her? Who's responsible for putting her in that position? That's somebody who is potentially sharing liability because of the fact that she allegedly did not have the requisite experience for this kind of a role. Defendant Baldwin and the others, and the other producers, were aware that Defendant Gutierrez-Reed was unqualified, and they ignored Defendant Gutierrez-Reed's concerns that performing the dual roles of armorer and assistant prop master would result in lapses in basic firearm safety. So right there, we are talking about not just negligence, but recklessness. If you know that something exists and then you decide to move forward anyway, you know that some kind of a condition exists and you move forward anyway and you ignore it. We are pointing at recklessness, not even basic negligence. Defendant Baldwin and the other defendants ignored actual unintentional firearm discharges that had occurred on the set of Rust as a direct consequence of failures of defendant Gutierrez-Reed to adequately perform her duties as armorer, and did not replace defendant Gutierrez-Reed with a qualified armorer or require additional safety procedures to correct the dangerous conditions on the set of Rust despite multiple written complaints about the danger. So this is another situation. So not only did they know that she was not particularly qualified for this kind of a role, but they also knew that there were other situations where a firearm went off when it was not supposed to have gone off, and that, you know, they knew that and they ignored it. Anytime they know and they ignore, we're talking about recklessness. So, and this is like, and you can also have, you know, maybe some producers were not maybe some of the producers were not there on set physically, but they still have responsibility because they have people that are on set that are reporting to them, or people that are on set that are reporting to someone else that's reporting to them. So there's still, because there's a chain of basically like corporate responsibility here, we still have people that are held responsible for these kinds of things, even if they're not physically there themselves. The most basic firearm safety rule in the movie industry is that there must never be live ammunition containing bullets, gunpowder, and a live primer on a movie set, as live ammunition could mistakenly be loaded into a gun. Industry standards and the Bonanza Creek locations rules specifically forbade the use of any live ammunition containing bullets on the set of Rust. Where bullets that appear to be real are required for cinematic purposes, dummy bullets that typically contain a BB, a small metal ball, are used, which are distinguishable from live ammunition upon visual inspection or by shaking to hear the BB inside. The live bullet that killed Halyna Hutchins was present on the set of Rust at the time of the shooting and was not detected prior to its discharge due to the failure of the defendants to follow industry standard safety protocols and perform basic firearm safety checks. So, if you guys are familiar with the Hannah Gutierrez-Reed civil lawsuit, the one that she filed, there's also a part in there. I don't know if you remember, but there was a part in her allegations where she talks about how she picked up the box and she shook it because she was listening to hear if those were dummy rounds. The problem with that is she said she picked up the box of rounds as opposed to individual rounds. And so this makes it very clear, these allegations here saying that each round is supposed to kind of jingle because there's a BB in there as opposed to live ammunition. But if you pick up a box, each of these rounds are going to jingle next to each other. So that would seem like those factual allegations would seem to be consistent with, you know, either her inexperience or her lack of attention, perhaps. And that's something that has been alleged by one of these defendants in another civil lawsuit. So, paragraph 48. Many of the movie industry firearm safety protocols are tailored to the purpose of protecting cast and crew from the risk of injury from the discharge of blank ammunition that does not contain bullets. But those same safety protocols and basic gun safety rules, when followed, have the effect of ensuring that no discharge of a firearm on the set ever presents a danger to human life, even if a bullet is present. Because Defendant Baldwin and the others involved in the Rust production did not follow industry protocols and basic gun safety rules, a live round containing a .45 caliber bullet was in the revolver held by Defendant Baldwin at the time of the shooting, ready to be fired, and Defendant Baldwin caused that bullet to be discharged directly at Miss Hutchins. The events that resulted in the death of Halyna Hutchins occurred on and leading up to October 21st, 2021, when defendant Alec Baldwin and Halyna Hutchins were on the set of Rust. Defendant Baldwin was the film's executive producer, lead actor, and contributing writer. Miss Hutchins was the film's director of photography. At the time of the shooting, Defendant Baldwin, Miss Hutchins, and other crew members were doing a lineup of a shootout scene in an old abandoned church. The sole purpose of a lineup for this scene was to confirm the positioning, frame, and focus of the camera for a close-up shot of Defendant Baldwin's hand and the revolver he was holding. But Defendant Baldwin's possession of a real revolver, let alone a revolver loaded with any ammunition at all, was unnecessary to achieve this purpose. the scene in question did not even call for the revolver held by defendant Baldwin to be fired. So they're saying there wasn't even supposed to be anything in this revolver. He didn't even need to have an actual revolver at that time when they were rehearsing that scene anyway. So this is danger that was introduced to the scene that didn't need to be introduced. And what they're saying is that if they had followed all of the industry standards and all of the protocols, then this wouldn't have happened, because they can they can do what they need to do without putting anyone else at risk here. Now, whether or not that's actually true is something that would be litigated in this case. I mean, assuming it doesn't settle like right away, that's a huge possibility here. But for the purposes of a motion to dismiss, we're assuming that this is true. We're assuming that this is correct, the way that they are alleging this. Defendant Baldwin was sitting on a church pew at the Bonanza Creek location, approximately 4 feet away from multiple members of the crew of Rust, when he reached across his body and used his right hand to grab the revolver holstered on his left side, drew the revolver with a cross-draw movement across his body, and aimed it directly at Miss Hutchins while drawing back the hammer on the revolver. He released the revolver's hammer and bam. I'm reading this directly for anybody that is listening on the podcast version. I'm reading this verbatim. He released the revolver's hammer and bam, defendant Baldwin fired the revolver. The live bullet discharged from defendant Baldwin's revolver struck Miss Hutchins in the side of her chest, ricocheted through her body, causing grievous injury, and exited Miss Hutchins' body with sufficient force to strike director Joel Souza in the shoulder and pass almost entirely through his body. Miss Hutchins endured enormous pain and suffering and died from her wounds. So here we have element number 3, which it seems silly that that we need to check that box because we all know what happened, right? But the judge that is going to be reading this has to know that this element is met, right? That we can check that box. So we can check the box for harm, for negligence. Paragraph 54. Defendant Baldwin, the producers, and the Rust production companies were aware of firearms safety issues that had occurred on the set of Rust and did not take action to correct the situation and ensure that basic gun safety rules were followed on October 21st, 2021. Had defendant Baldwin, the producers, and the Rust production companies taken adequate precautions to ensure firearm safety on the set of Rust, or if basic firearm safety rules had been followed on the set of Rust on October 21st, 2021, Halyna Hutchins would be alive and well, hugging her husband and 9-year-old son. So this is getting to causation. They are alleging that, had they done everything the way that they were supposed to, no bullet, the revolver wouldn't have gone off the way that it did. There wouldn't have been live ammunition in there. She wouldn't have been hit with a bullet. She wouldn't have passed through her body. She wouldn't have had, grievous bodily harm. She wouldn't have died. So this is getting to causation here. And basically what they're saying is, on the one hand, they're saying that there were people that did not take action to correct the situation and ensure that basic gun safety rules were followed. And at the same time, there were people that what to do, sorry. So on the one hand, there were not rules that were enforced, and then there were not rules that were followed. So we have people, regardless of whether this is somebody who is supposed to be enforcing the rules or following the rules, everyone from top to bottom is responsible. Okay. Defendant's aggressive cost cutting endangered the Rust cast and crew. So here we get to probably how most of these producers are going to be brought into this lawsuit. The Rust production companies were low-budget film production companies in the business of making films and were responsible for soliciting talent for the Rust production and hiring the crew to produce the film. The Rust production companies utilized aggressive cost-cutting practices during the Rust production that jeopardized and endangered the safety of the cast and crew of Rust. Defendants' cost-cutting measures included hiring inexperienced and unqualified armorers or weapons masters, requiring the film's armorer to split time as assistant props master, establishing and aggressively adhering to unreasonably rushed production schedules, and hiring unqualified and inexperienced crew and staff that were responsible for safety during the production. So these are all different things that different individuals could have been responsible for. You know, who was in charge of hiring her? Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. Who was in charge of managing her role? Who was in charge of setting the schedule, setting the timeline? Who was in charge of, hiring other unqualified and inexperienced crew and staff that were responsible for safety during the production? So all of these people are getting brought in here because of the fact that she was allegedly inexperienced and other people were allegedly inexperienced. The Rust production companies hired Miss Hutchins as the director of photography of Rust as an independent contractor. Miss Hutchins brought her own equipment to the production and was responsible for forming her own team for the camera department, including camera operators, gaffers, and dolly grips. The Rust production was the first time Miss Hutchins had worked with the Rust production companies, the producers, or director Joel Souza. So she had to even bring in her own equipment. That's interesting. On October 6, 2021, the cast and crew of the Rust production began shooting the film. The script for Rust included numerous scenes involving the presence of firearms and simulated gunfights, rather than use computer-generated or digital effects together with prop guns that were not capable of firing ammunition. Excuse me. The Rust production companies and the producers decided to use real live firearms. So despite the fact that they had the capability to do this digitally, they decided to go with what looks the most real, right? Rather than paying money for digital effects, so to speak. The aggressive cost-cutting measures of the Rust production companies resulted in the Rust production being riddled with breaches of safety protocols that resulted in the presence of live ammunition on the set of Rust and unsafe handling of firearms. On 2 separate occasions prior to the shooting of Miss Hutchins, guns on the Rust production had been discharged in an unsafe manner while loaded with ammunition. In response to these weapons discharges and inadequate firearm inspections, crew members of the production made complaints about safety on the set to supervisors, including the executive producers, and line producers. Oh boy, these complaints were ignored. The producers held no safety meetings. Oof, that's bad. They took no action to prevent further unsafe handling of firearms. They did not suspend the production to investigate the weapons discharges or the inadequate adherence to safety protocols. Instead, the producers decided to go full steam ahead and rush the filming of the production to keep costs down. Now, notice that they are not alleging here. They're not alleging that the production companies and the producers and whatnot didn't do enough for safety. They are saying they did nothing for safety. They had no safety meetings. They ignored complaints of safety by, safety issues by different people on set. And those complaints were made directly to supervisors, executive producers, and line producers. This means that not only, earlier I was talking about there's kind of this corporate chain of command, right? Somebody reports to somebody else, reports to some kind of executive producer at some point, right? But you've got people that are it looks like that are reporting directly to these different individuals and saying they ignored them. So you don't even have to rely on that kind of like not phone tag. What's the word? Game of telephone, so to speak, to say that somewhere along the line communications broke down. No, these are individual people that had been made that had complaints made directly to them and they ignored them. That is damning if true, very damning if true. And the fact that they didn't have any safety meetings, also very damning. and the fact that they didn't suspend the production to investigate the weapons discharges. So no one stopped when there was a weapons discharge. No one was like, "Hey, what's going on? This is unsafe. We need to make sure that this doesn't result in somebody getting hurt." Yikes. That is bad if true. Bad for the defendants. A few short days before the death of Miss Hutchins, Lane Looper, a local camera operator for the production, made safety complaints to the producers. On October 16th, 2021, Mr. Looper told Defendant Walters, a representative for the producers, that there had been 3 unsafe weapon discharges and the set was, quote, super unsafe. Defendant Walters responded with callous sarcasm, saying the accidental discharges were, quote, awesome and, quote, sounded good. Oy. That is bad. That is really bad. So Walters was a representative for the producers. So and then for anybody that is listening on the podcast version, they included in here some screenshots of some text messages. Now, of course, they've been cut out very closely, so we can't see any context beforehand or afterwards. And there's always something that could be lost by losing that context. But here's what it says. So we've got in text writing in blue, and it looks like an iPhone screen, right? Text writing in blue. We've now had 3 accidental discharges. This is super unsafe. And RAP should be like 30 to 45, I think. And then the text response was accidental discharge on the firearms. Awesome. Sounds good. Oh my God. That's nuts. If that's the response and no one was alarmed, no one was concerned about safety, that is bad. We are definitely getting to at least recklessness for at least some of these individuals, right? Okay. The producers chose not to take the safety complaint by Mr. Looper seriously and brushed the safety concerns under the rug because investigating and addressing these safety concerns would delay production and stretch the production budget. Woof. We have people that are taking budget concerns above safety concerns. That's bad. That's bad. Okay. Now some people are saying in the chat that it sounds like sarcasm. Now that is possible. Referring to the text exchange, the response, accidental discharge on the firearms. Awesome. Sounds good. I don't know. That could potentially be sarcasm. And that's what I mean by context can sometimes matter in this kind of a situation. And if it is sarcasm, that is something that would be talked about, in a deposition, in, witness testimony and whatnot. When this person that responded, when they are ultimately brought in discovery and asked about this whole exchange, they would have an opportunity to say, like, well, that's not what I meant. And this person would understand that that's not what I meant. Now, that is not relevant for determining whether or not this complaint is a good one or a bad one. So, despite the fact that this could be taken out of context, and it could be that context shows that this is actually sarcasm, despite that, we are, like I said, we're taking all facts as they are alleged as true. We're assuming that this is true. We're assuming that what they're saying is that this text response means that this guy was just ignoring it and that he was saying, awesome, that's great, that sounds good. Sounds good that there is an accidental, discharge, etc. So that's that. Theo Frastus, thanks for your super chat. It says, my military unit regularly trained with the full auto M16 rifle, all 180 troops, including cooks, mechanics, and typists. What I'm hearing is appalling. Yeah, it is appalling. I do agree. I agree. The fact that there's, according to the allegations, there is, there are many people that were complained to about the situation and they decided to just ignore it. Whether or not that's true is going to be coming up, in discovery, right? Or in whatever response that each defendant files with the court, because they either are going to be filing a motion to dismiss or they're going to be filing an answer. At some point, assuming that the case doesn't get dismissed, at some point they have to file an answer. So even if they file a motion to dismiss at one point, if they lose on that, then they have to follow that up with filing an answer. And that's how you proceed with the litigation. So, they may say, okay, well, that, those are text messages between me and so, but that doesn't exactly capture the conversation that we had. So anyhow, potentially criminal. Thank you so much for your super chat. Just tuned in, but do you think this was filed because they were told that Baldwin will not be charged criminally? No, I don't think so. I think that they were probably going to be filing this no matter what, regardless of whether or not he was going to be charged criminally. And that is because when we are talking about a criminal case versus a civil case, the burden is much higher in a criminal case. It's generally speaking much easier to sue someone successfully civilly, especially where we're talking about a negligence claim or a wrongful death claim like this, in comparison to a criminal case. So, but the thing about waiting for a criminal case to happen is that if, let's say, New Mexico, let's say charges are filed against Alec Baldwin at some point, because my understanding is that the investigation is still ongoing. I don't think they've completed it. I haven't seen any reporting that they've completed their investigation. So I know that a lot of people are upset about the fact that Alec Baldwin has not been charged at this point. I don't know that means that he's not going to be charged. I think there's still a possibility of that, unless someone can correct me that the police in New Mexico have completed their investigation and they decided that they're done and they're not going to charge him. My understanding, like I said, is that has not actually happened yet. So it could still be the case that he's charged. Now, there can also be a criminal case and a civil case happening at the same time. If the criminal case goes forward, and let's say Alec Baldwin is charged criminally, and he is found guilty of some kind of manslaughter or murder, even, of Halyna Hutchins. That determination by a jury can be applied to a civil case because it's much harder to find a criminal defendant guilty than it is to find civil liability against a defendant. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Basically, you can say, because the standard is so much higher and a jury, despite that standard, still found him guilty, that's definitely going to meet the civil standard, right? So you can definitely apply that over here. The same is not necessarily true of a civil case, because just somebody can find someone civilly liable. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're also criminally liable, because there's that little space of burden that has to be met. So you still would have a need for a full trial for a criminal case after a civil case. That's why a lot of times you'll see civil cases kind of wait until criminal charges are filed, or that or that a full trial will happen, because it kind of eliminates a lot of work on the part of the civil side, because they can just kind of apply that. Now, it's not necessarily the case if the person is acquitted that means that they wouldn't be held liable civilly. So, like I said, it's a way that they could eliminate some of the work on the civil side. But in this particular case, I mean, at the same time, they still have a statute of limitations that is running for any civil case. So you can't wait too long to file a case. So in this situation, it seems to me that they were probably just waiting on investigating, either from the police in their investigation, or they were probably also doing their own, and probably, maybe talking with all kinds of individuals from the set, talking with all kinds of, gathering all kinds of information on these different production companies, on these different individuals, on, who was doing what at different times. So that's probably why it took some time. And I think that the reason why they would file this in the first place, to really answer the question of the super chat, is that, you have somebody that died. I mean, this is a situation that is definitely going to have a civil lawsuit, like regardless of whether there's any criminal charges, because you have somebody who died that was not supposed to die, and in a way that they were not supposed to die. So you have somebody who is, who has civil damages. So whether or not those will be massive or minuscule will depend on what comes out in the litigation, in discovery. But my guess is that it's probably going to be about as much as they can possibly claim, because there's a lot of entities, there's a lot of individuals, a lot of pockets that they can pull from in this particular case. So that answers that, I hope. Okay. Moving back to the complaint. Paragraph 62. The producers chose not to take the safety complaint by Mr. Looper seriously and brushed the safety concerns under the rug because investigating and addressing these safety concerns would delay production and stretch the production budget. On the morning of Ms. Hutchins' tragic death, October 21st, 2021, the safety dangers of the production had reached a crisis point. The local camera crew members were so upset by the producers' utter disregard for the safety that they protested the safety conditions by going on strike. Now, we've also heard some reporting that maybe some of that had to do with housing. That's possible. I mean, that may be kind of a counter argument by some of these defendants that that's not really what they were, arguing about. It wasn't really so much about safety conditions, but regardless, like I said, we are taking these allegations as true. And so if we are to do that, that's pretty damning. If this does prove to be true, that's pretty damning in this lawsuit. Mr. Looper put his concerns in writing, telling the producers of the Rust film the reason for the strike was, quote, 3 areas where safety has become a massive issue, and massive is in bold and italics. One of those 3 areas was safety, with ellipses, with weapons. Mr. Looper explained, and here's a box for anybody that's listening for the podcast version. There's a box here that seems to be a direct quote from some kind of a statement somewhere. It doesn't exactly say where from. I wish it did, but okay. Mr. Looper explained, the second issue I'd like to bring up in regards to safety has to do with weapons. During the filming of gunfights on this job, things are often played very fast and loose. So far, there have been 2 accidental weapons discharges and 1 accidental SFX explosives that have gone off around the crew between takes. I personally suffer from pretty bad tinnitus, and the SFX explosives sent my ears ringing until I got home. To be clear, there are no safety meetings these days. There have been no explanations as to what to expect for these shots. When anyone from production is asked, we are usually met with the same answers about not having enough time to complete the day if we rehearse, or that it was, quote, this is a 21-day shoot. Ugh. Oh my God. That is bad. It's bad. It's really bad, guys. If this is true, then these people are asking the producers directly. They're saying, oh, what is going on here? What is there are explosives that are going off. There are weapons discharges that are happening that are not supposed to be happening. What are we doing to prevent these from hurting somebody? And they're just saying, oh, I don't know. We don't have time. That is not a good answer when you have a lawsuit like this, when you have somebody who has died. Maybe if no one had gotten hurt, then no one would be talking about these production issues, right? But the fact that somebody died, now we're talking about them. And now these people are going to be probably in some really big trouble for having those kind of responses. Defendants did nothing to improve firearm safety in response to Mr. Looper's written safety warnings. Defendant Pickle insisted that Mr. Looper and the other camera operators going on strike due to safety conditions get off the set and remove the equipment they had brought for use on set as quickly as possible to avoid any impact on the Rust production schedule and budget. Defendant Pickle responded on behalf of the producers. And now we have, this looks like an excerpt from an email. So this is probably part of the investigation that they did, was that they were gathering all kinds of different communications between people. So here's an excerpt from an email from Gabrielle Pickle. This is one of the defendants on October 21st, 2021 at 6:40. And I'm guessing it's AM. It doesn't say AM or PM. It says, Lane, good morning. Please call myself or Ro when you or your team arrive at Bonanza Creek. We will coordinate your gear delivery in a way that does not impact the shoot day. Thank you, Gabrielle. So There you go. They have emails to back up some of these allegations. That definitely, they don't need it. A complaint does not need to have these little excerpts from emails and text messages and stuff, but it really does bolster it, and it does help to prevent the situation that I was talking about before, where somebody just decides to file a motion to dismiss to try to drum up legal costs, because it looks kind of bad if you're trying to do that. And you see that they have actual evidence to back it up, because you can see that they're embedding them in this complaint. Paragraph 66, Defendant Pickles' response on behalf of the producers showed no concern or care for the, quote, massive, unquote, safety concerns of the striking crew. Nor did the production company's response deny the, quote, 2 accidental weapons discharges, unquote, and, quote, 1 accidental SFX explosive, unquote. The producer's sole concern was that the camera operator's departure not delay the aggressive production schedule and cost them money. So this seems to suggest that the previous excerpt that we read from by Mr. Looper was in email, and that's what it seems like. That's what Gabriel Pickle was responding to was that specific email. Just based on this context here. I wish that had been clearer, but I mean, I feel like at this point I'm being a little bit nitpicky on this complaint, because otherwise this is very, so far, this is a well-drafted complaint, and they're making it very clear who's responsible for what, and how these various responsibilities are playing out. Okay, now we get to the next section, called The Day of the Killing of Halyna Hutchins. Paragraph 67. On October 21st, 2021, the day started off slow because of the camera crew's protest of the safety conditions. The departing camera crew collected their personal equipment, and production continued with an improvised alternative shooting plan using the remaining skeleton crew of the camera department. After lunch, the production went to the Bonanza Creek Church to line up the cameras for a scene showing Defendant Baldwin cross-drawing his revolver. Interesting that they used the term skeleton crew. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it does seem very foreshadowing and eerie of like what's about to happen, which everybody knows what's about to happen because we all know the facts of this case. Defendant Armorer Gutierrez-Reed, who was responsible for maintaining the revolver and the ammunition while on set, had left the revolver and ammunition out of the safe she maintained for securing firearms on the set. Defendant Gutierrez-Reed did not verify the revolver or ammunition were safe before the first assistant director, Defendant Halls, took the revolver to Defendant Baldwin. So now, before I continue on here, based on what we know from Hannah's civil lawsuit that she filed, she's probably going to say, well, that was outside of my control because somebody stepped in and took it, and I didn't know. You know, I only found out late that they were even doing this. I found out that the revolver was already there, this and that. But at the end of the day, she still bears responsibility to maintain control over these firearms, regardless of what other personalities are on set. And that's just the liability standard. I mean, that's her job, right? If that's literally your job is to maintain control and safety over these items, it doesn't matter what anybody else does to step in to take your role from you. Like, you have to either fight to maintain that control yourself or submit your resignation and leave. That's pretty much the only alternatives for someone in her position. And it sucks if that's the case, if that's actually how things were playing out, if she really was trying to do her best in this job, but that they were that people were stepping over her role, and people were spreading her thin by making her perform other duties as well. Those are the alternatives, because she should understand that the job that she's taking is a very dangerous job. And if anybody is hurt on set, that's her head too. So, okay. Continuing on, Defendant Halls never verified the revolver was safe before handing it to Defendant Baldwin. So, the first part of this paragraph was all about pointing fingers at Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, now Defendant Halls. He also is responsible. He's responsible for, even though it's not his role technically, but by stepping into that role, essentially, he is responsible for taking a revolver and not verifying it was safe before handing it to Alec Baldwin. Defendant Baldwin accepted the gun from Defendant Halls rather than the production's armorer. Defendant Baldwin never verified the gun was safe before operating the gun, nor did he require the armorer or Defendant Halls to demonstrate in his presence that the gun was safe. So this, and I don't know if they're going to say this later on, but, it seems to suggest, without saying, I wish it would explicitly state it to make it more clear, but it seems to suggest that Defendant Baldwin should not have accepted the gun from Defendant Halls. He should have only accepted the gun from the armorer. They haven't stated this, like I said. This is, me talking about what would be the ideal, what I would like to see, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this is a terrible complaint. So far, this is a pretty good complaint. Defendant Baldwin never verified the gun was safe before operating the gun, nor did he require the armorer or Defendant Halls to demonstrate in his presence that the gun was safe. Now, is that something that he should have known? Probably. It hasn't alleged that so far, based on his experience, based on, what he should be, what any actor in that position should know. But at the same time, this is what it's suggesting. So I just, as kind of an aside, I wish that was a little bit more explicit. Okay, moving on. At the lineup in the church, Defendant Baldwin sat in a church pew approximately 4 feet away from Miss Hutchins and the other crew members there. Defendant Baldwin used his right hand to unholster the revolver, pointed the gun at Miss Hutchins and the other crew who were just 4 feet away, and released the hammer of the revolver, causing it to discharge. Because there was live ammunition in the gun, a .45 caliber bullet was discharged and struck Miss Hutchins, ricocheted through her body, and then hit Joel Souza, the director of the film, in the shoulder. The bullet was discharged with sufficient force to pass entirely through Miss Hutchins' body and through Joel Souza's shoulder, ending its path embedded in Joel Souza's back, less than 2 inches from his spine. Oh, good Lord. He could have been paralyzed for life with that. So, okay. Miss Hutchins said, "I'm hit." Mr. Souza yelled, "Ow." And obviously, I think it probably was a bit more audible than how I'm reading it. The Steadicam operator, and that, by the way, is one reason why, generally speaking, when we're talking about transcripts from trial and whatnot, a lot can be lost by reading a deposition transcript or a trial transcript, as opposed to seeing actual video footage. Because you can read it as "I'm hit" and "ow," when in fact, if you saw it in person, it was probably much more audible and much more traumatic than that. Anyhow, just that little bit of an aside. The Steadicam operator and the gaffer moved quickly to help Miss Hutchins. Defendant Baldwin did not offer help to any of the victims. Now, okay, so that's an interesting point that they added in here, because it's not necessary for someone in his position to offer help. It doesn't make any fact of his negligence, recklessness, willfulness in this case. It doesn't make any of his liability more or less likely, but it does seem like that was intended primarily to say, yeah, he was an asshole. He was an asshole in this scene. He didn't even help. It doesn't say what he did, but it does say that he didn't offer help. So it's an interesting sentence that they added in here. Because, like I said, it doesn't do anything for the liability, but I think it does for the court of public opinion. Okay. Anyhow, that's just a little bit of an aside. Medics responded to the scene. Miss Hutchins was taken to the hospital, where she died as a result of the grievous wounds inflicted by the bullet. Miss Hutchins' husband and young son have been devastated by her death. Okay. So that's the factual allegations, and then there's count 1 and count 2, and we'll go through those. But so far, for the negligence claim, for the wrongful death claim, whether or not they are, whether or not we're talking about negligence, recklessness, or intentional willful behavior, I think that there's probably a lot here that some people can be found probably acting in reckless disregard for the safety of crew members and particularly Halyna Hutchins, since she was the one who was injured here, and she's the subject of this lawsuit. So that first count, there's a lot of allegation there. We really, so far for loss of consortium, all we really have is Miss Hutchins' husband and young son have been devastated by her death. So my guess is that we're probably going to get a little bit more color when we go to count 2 talking about that, because there are certain elements that are going to need to be alleged here. I mean, so far, okay, we do know. So if we were to go to loss of consortium, and I apologize again, I don't know why this formatting is so weird. On my normal PowerPoint here that I have set up, it's normal. I don't know why the formatting is just weird. Okay. Anyway, sorry about that, guys. So for loss of consortium, I mean, close familial relationship, we know that we're talking about the husband and the son. So element 1, yeah, that's met. Tortious injury to the injured, yes, of course, we have that so far. Loss of consortium suffered by non-injured spouse, child, parent. Maybe all we have is just that they've been devastated by her death. Maybe there might be enough so far, but whether it was proximately caused, yes, of course, she would be here with a loving relationship with both of them, if not for the behavior of these other defendants individually and together as a group. So I would say that we have all of these individual things. So 1, 2, and 4. Now, as far as the first 4 elements for negligence, I think yes. Duty of reasonable care. We went through that whole list A through I of like all of the things that you're not supposed to do or that you're supposed to do when you're talking about handling a firearm or being around a firearm. Then they breached that duty because they alleged that they breached those duties. They didn't do any of those things that were supposed to be done, and those could be directed at different defendants depending on which duty that we're talking about that was listed there. Plaintiff was harmed, obviously, death. 4, defendant's breach caused plaintiff's harm. Yes, we have that because they've alleged that she would be living with her husband and her son right now and giving them hugs and whatnot and all kinds of love. So those are met. So the one thing that is maybe kind of missing that kind of needs to be bolstered at this point in the complaint is element 3 of loss of consortium. This loss of consortium suffered by non-injured spouse, child, parent, and what we need for that is basically for them to talk about the relationship that she had with them. If we need that, I don't know. Even now, I don't know. There might be enough that could be inferred based on the type of relationship here, maybe. But I would much prefer to see some kind of allegation about the relationship that she had with them. To show that there was a loss of intimacy, a loss of loving memories, like that kind of thing. Okay, let's get to count 1. So, and when we go into the next section, if you aren't familiar with a complaint, generally speaking, you're going to see a sentence like this that says all previous paragraphs are incorporated herein by reference. This is just like it's just a basic sentence saying everything that we just read through, assume that it's also in this subsection. This is just basically to say so that no defendant can come in and say, well, you didn't actually allege that those facts applied to this particular account and try to be sneaky or tricky or whatever. So just for the uninitiated, that's just what that means. Okay. The producers and the Rust production companies. So now for count 1, sorry, for anybody listening, count 1, negligent, intentional, willful, or reckless misconduct resulting in wrongful death. So this is the negligence claim, the wrongful death claim, the, recklessness situation. So now we're going to get into those details. The producers and the Rust production companies, each of them individually and collectively, once they made the decision to use real guns on the set, had a duty to A, provide a reasonably safe production set environment, B, hire, train, supervise, and oversee crew who were qualified to ensure the safe procurement, storage, maintenance, transportation, transfers from person to person, and operation of deadly weapons, including the revolver that killed Miss Hutchins, as well as ammunition on the production set. C, design, establish, adopt, implement, monitor, and oversee reasonable safety protocols to protect the safety of all cast and crew on the site, including Miss Hutchins. D, design, establish, adopt, implement, monitor, and oversee reasonable safety protocols for the procurement, storage, inspection, maintenance, and operation of all deadly weapons and ammunition on the Rust production, including safe distances between real weapons being operated and cast and crew, safe handling and aiming of real weapons to ensure no weapon is ever aimed at any human being, reasonable protection of cast and crew from the risks of deadly weapons, and reasonable inspection of weapons for safety. E, train all those handling firearms and basic gun safety rules and the operation of the revolver fired in this case, including how to check to see if it was empty or loaded only with blank rounds. F, ensure guns were not loaded but completely empty during lineups for shots. G, ensure there was no live ammunition on set or placed in any of the guns used during the production. H, conduct multiple inspections of every gun handed to an operator or actor to ensure the gun was empty, or if needed for a shot, only contained blank rounds and no live ammunition. There's a lot of duties here. I, inspect any weapon handed to an operator, including actors, to ensure such weapon is free of live ammunition and safe for operation in relation to the intended use of the weapon. J, ensure that the armorer was in exclusive possession of all weapons and ammunition at all times, except to the extent necessary for shooting scenes. K, prevent live ammunition from infiltrating the production set. L, ensure all operators of a real revolver, including Defendant Baldwin, named him specifically, had adequate training, background, experience, and licensing with such deadly weapons. M, reasonably respond to complaints, concerns, and reports of cast and crew on the Rust production regarding weapon safety and take all action necessary to resolve such complaints, concerns, and reports, including shutting down or suspending the production, delaying the production, inspecting all weapons and ammunition on set, and auditing records to ensure all personnel were adequately trained in weapons handling and safety. And N, finally, investigate all unexpected near misses or discharges of guns or explosives on set to determine the root cause and prevent any other weapon safety breaches. Wow, that's a lot of duties. And we've got a lot of defendants that may fit into each of these different duties, depending on which ones we're talking about. You know, a lot of these are going to be, provide a reasonably safe production set environment. I think, most likely the producers here, the production companies, hire, train, supervise, and oversee crew who are qualified. That's again talking about producers here. Design, establish, adopt, implement the reasonable safety protocols. Producers here. Design, establish, adopt, implement, monitor, and oversee reasonable safety protocols for the procurement, storage, blah, 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 about the weapons and the ammunition. Okay, yes. And then, talking about training, talking about, then going down to a more granular level. We're talking about ensuring that the guns are not loaded. Those are, we're talking about the armorer. We're talking about the assistant director. We're talking about Baldwin himself. So these different duties are going to apply to different defendants depending on which duty we're talking about. But basically, all of them are going to connect to one another because they are all working together on this one project. Even though they have different roles within this project, they are all operating for the same goal, and that is to make a movie, right? So all of these duties are present regardless of who has what, because they're all working together. Even if, one person has been found liable, most likely there's going to be a bunch of people that are held liable in this case, assuming that the facts play out the way that we're thinking that they're going to play out. This is a lot, and they've really laid it out very specifically from top to bottom. I think this is very comprehensive. So as to the first element about was there a duty, there's a lot of duties here that have been alleged. Okay. Paragraph 74. Oh, now they're talking specifically about Alec Baldwin. Defendant Baldwin had a duty to A, learn the gun safety rules before picking up a firearm on set. B, learn how to safely operate and self-check the specific revolver in this case to make sure it was not loaded or was loaded with blank rounds. Now, okay, so that could be because they may be anticipating that he'll say, no one gave me training. No one, no no one, the armorer didn't sit me down and train me, even though realistically the power dynamic between those two could be a situation where, she's a young woman, he's an A-list movie star that who is known to have a certain reputation for let's just say not necessarily being the nicest person, let's say. So, how is she going to try to hold him down for a training? So they're saying you have a responsibility to take it upon yourself to learn the safety of handling a firearm, regardless of what anybody else has set up for you. This is something that you were supposed to do on your own. And that's true. It is true. Okay, now C. So he also had a duty to never point the gun at any person. D, always treat the gun as if it were loaded. E, be aware of the people present in the direction where he was pointing the gun and beyond. F, keep his finger away from the trigger or not operate the revolver's hammer until he decided to shoot. Now that or is doing some work for this sentence, because if you remember, I mean, and this is why you don't do sit down interviews with George Stephanopoulos when there's still an investigation going and you know that there's going to be a civil lawsuit that's filed in this case, is because, I mean, you know that your words are going to come back to haunt you. And this is what they're saying, that they're saying he was supposed to keep his finger away from the trigger. He would probably say, my finger wasn't on the trigger. And David Halls has made, or his legal team, I guess, has made a statement saying, I didn't see Alec Baldwin's finger on the trigger, which is a self-serving statement. So, you can take it at however you want, whether or not you believe that or not. But that is a self-serving statement because David Hall is also a defendant in this case. And if Alec Baldwin is not responsible, that means that there's a less likelihood that David Hall would be responsible, potentially. But by saying that he had a duty to keep his finger away from the trigger or not operate the revolver's hammer until he decided to shoot, that right there, because that's the famous statement, right? Where he said, I let the hammer go and the gun went off. I let the hammer go and the gun went off. And he said it like several times as if somehow that's better. But what they're saying is even if you try to say that you didn't pull that trigger, you should not have pulled that hammer back unless you knew that you were ready to shoot. All right. He also had a duty to G, not shoot the gun during the lineup of a shot. H, ensure the persons hired as armorers were experts in firearm safety. And this is pointing to his role as a producer, I believe. Because I don't think that you could say that any basic actor in a movie who's not also a producer could have any kind of control as to who's being hired. But I think that this is pointing to him as not just the actor, not as a writer for the film, but also as a producer, that he has some kind of control over who's being hired here. And he might come back and say, I didn't have any control over that. That was not something that anyone ever talked to me about. But then, okay, we've got a whole list of other duties that he had here. He also had a duty to I, accept a weapon for use on the set from personnel qualified to store, maintain, inspect, and handle deadly weapons. J, conduct or observe a visual inspection of any weapon before taking possession of the weapon. K, never aim a deadly weapon at cast and crew at the rust production unless, when required to do so for a scene, cast and crew were adequately protected. Because that's also a point, right? That he's saying, during his interview, he's like, well, during when we were checking the lighting or whatever, and she was telling me what to do. He was like very softly blaming the victim, saying that he was only doing what she was telling him to do. She was saying, okay, lower it, pull it back, pull the hammer back. you know, they're still saying, they're like, okay, even assuming that that is the way that things played out, you should have known that you can't do that unless there is a certain level of protection between where you're pointing the revolver and where other people are. Making sure that there are as few people as possible in the direction that you are firing. And if there absolutely have to be people there, let's say for example, we've talked about this on this channel. We've talked about how, there could be a scene in a movie where the revolver is pointed and at the camera, because the camera is filming so that you as the viewer are looking from the perspective of somebody who is about to be shot, right? Like there are those kinds of scenes in movies. So there could be a situation where there's a gun that's pointed directly at a camera. Okay, that's fair. But when you do that, you have to make sure that there are certain safety precautions around that, right? So whether that is physical barriers between him and other people, or making sure that there's absolutely nothing in the chamber, that kind of thing. Yeah, someone in the chat said plexiglass shield. Of course. Okay, he also had a duty to, okay, let's see. We read K. To L, ensure any cast and crew are protected against any potential discharge of a weapon he wielded. And M, avoid recklessly discharging any deadly weapon, which is a criminal offense in the state of New Mexico. This statement, the second half of the sentence right here, which is a criminal offense in the state of New Mexico. It's interesting that they added this because it's not necessary for this complaint, but it is interesting that it's kind of pointing over to, oh, by the way, there should be criminal charges that are filed here. Interesting. Brick Cormier, thanks for the super chat. He says, I agree in that the interview, I definitely got she was asking for this because he kept saying she was directing me to do things. Yeah, no, I definitely think so. And it was something that he was trying to be very soft about it, because I think he knows, like anyone would know, anyone with half a brain would know that, like, that going on a national interview and saying, the person that is dead, the person who left behind a husband and a 9-year-old son, essentially was asking for it because she told me to do it. That's a really bad look. It's a really bad look. But it's almost like he couldn't help himself. He couldn't sit in that hot seat that he's been kind of placed in ever since October 21st. And so I think that he just, I don't know. I mean, it was a terrible idea to go on that interview, and this is why, right? I mean, not to say that by going on that interview, he brought this lawsuit on himself, because the lawsuit would have happened regardless of the interview. The problem is that he added so much information before there was any kind of a lawsuit. He gave them so much for their investigation that made it so much easier for them to gather stuff and to kind of anticipate some of his arguments, to say like, oh, I didn't pull the trigger. Well, you pulled the hammer and you admitted it on national TV. Okay. So that's one nail in your coffin that you can't back out of. You can't try to explain yourself out of that, to say, well, I didn't really pull the hammer. Okay, but you said you did months and months ago. So anyhow, okay, let's continue on. Paragraph 57. Or sorry, 75. Each of defendants Gutierrez-Reed and Seth Kenney. Now, remember, Seth Kenney is the guy that has the prop company, that he was providing a lot of props for the company, or for the set. Each of defendants Gutierrez-Reed and Seth Kenney had a duty to exercise reasonable care in the procurement, inventory, storage, inspection, maintenance, and operation of all weapons and ammunition on the Rust production, to prevent live ammunition from infiltrating the production and otherwise provide a reasonably safe production set environment. Yeah, they did. They both did, because he was providing the props and she was the armorer. So both of them Both of them had responsibility. Okay. Defendant Zachary had a duty to exercise reasonable care in the supervision of Defendant Gutierrez-Reed and Seth Kennedy. Oh, that's just a little bit of a typo. That's okay. We can look past that. And Seth Kennedy, and otherwise provide a reasonably safe production set environment. So because technically, remember, Sarah Zachary was technically Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's supervisor for set. Even though I guess they were having issues, but she was supposed to supervise. So regardless of whether they had decided that all of the weapons on set were supposed to be only, someone said the Kennedys are involved as well. No, they're not. That's just a typo. So, regardless of whether between them, they were like, no, Hannah's the only one that handles firearms. If you're the supervisor of the armorer, you are also 100% responsible for any kind of accidents that happen with the weapons on set. So doesn't matter what kind of agreement you went into on set or what kind of drama was going on between the two of you. Doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, the law doesn't really care. You still hold a certain amount of responsibility as a supervisor. Paragraph 77, Defendant Halls had a duty to A, provide a reasonably safe production set environment, B, refrain from delivering deadly weapons on the production to actors for usage without necessary background, training, and experience to do so, C, inspect any weapon being transferred to an actor in front of the actor to see if it was loaded or empty, and if loaded, to ensure it contained only blank rounds and not live ammunition, D, accurately report the scope, nature, and extent of any visual inspection performed on a deadly weapon before transfer to an actor. And E, investigate and reasonably respond to complaints, concerns, and reports of cast and crew on the rust production regarding misfires of weapons, near misses, and general weapon safety, and take all action necessary to resolve such complaints, concerns, and reports, including shutting down or suspending the production, delaying the production, inspecting all weapons and ammunition on set, and auditing records to ensure all personnel were adequately trained in weapons handling safety. So for him, it's like they're talking about the in the moment itself. He had a duty to ensure that the custody of the weapon was proper, that it was going from the right person to the right person. At the same time, he also had a duty to inspect. He also had a duty to accurately report the visual inspection. So if he says that he inspected and he said it's a cold gun and it's not a cold gun, he breached his duty by saying it's a cold gun when it's not. Now, if he just says, well, I didn't know how to check. No one told me how to check. And so I thought that I was doing the right thing. That's not going to fly either. Because if you are going to step into someone's role, like I said before, I've said this several times, if he is going to step into somebody's role, you're gonna take the some of their responsibility as well if something goes wrong. And at the same time, because he was the assistant director, he also had the duty to investigate and reasonably respond to complaints as well, just like all of the other producers that had people complaining to them about safety on set. All right. Paragraph 78. Each of the defendants, either individually or through its owners, management, employees, or agents, negligently, intentionally, recklessly, or willfully breached his or her duties to Halyna Hutchins by deciding not to take the actions described above that were required of them or taking actions that violated such duties. Yeah. So then we've got, like I said before, 4 elements for wrongful death action. First was duty. They just went through all of the defendants here and either lumped up all of the producers and the production companies for the broader scale, like that they were supposed to make sure that certain processes were in place. They were supposed to ensure that people were actually following the safety protocols that were set up. et cetera, et cetera. And then they went through each of the individuals that were there, having to do with the actual ammunition, having to do with the actual weapon, and that were there with the handoff of the weapon itself. I mean, they've gone through, they've checked every single box for duty for each of these defendants. And then all it takes is one paragraph to say, okay, they all breached their duties because none of them did what they were supposed to do here. So we have that box checked as well. All right. Okay. And okay. So, and sorry, excuse me. Paragraph 79. The producers and the rest production companies negligently, intentionally, recklessly, or willfully, individually, collectively, through their agents or employees, committed the following acts and omissions. Okay. Here we go. A, chose to hire the cheapest crew available rather than hiring, training, and supervising crew who were qualified to ensure the safe procurement, storage, maintenance, transportation, transfers from person to person, and operation of deadly weapons and ammunition. So here we're talking about, I mean, I've talked about this before as well, that when it comes to people like Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, where people were saying that she was unqualified for her job, we're going to be talking about negligent hiring. So that is kind of enveloped into this negligence claim, but certain defendants will basically have that against them for this. B, they knowingly hired a wholly unqualified armorer to act as the weapons master for the gun-heavy Western era Rust production. And this is important too, right? Because we're not just talking about a movie where there's just one scene with a gun, right? That this is just like there just is like one gun on this entire set. We're talking about a gun heavy Western era Rust production. So they should have anticipated that gun safety would have been an issue. Hey, Kurt, hands of a law. Good to see you in the chat. So that's what this description is doing, is to say that this was a gun heavy Western era Rust production. They absolutely should have known that this was going to be an issue. And so they should have spent some money on people who were super qualified. Okay. Anyhow, C, chose to require the armorer to split time working in a second role as assistant props master. So that was somebody's decision. Somebody's going to be held responsible for that decision specifically. D, chose to cut corners and not strictly enforce the industry standard gun safety protocols on set, including proper storage, inspection, maintenance, and operation of firearms and ammunition, presenting live ammunition on the set, and preventing a gun with loaded ammunition from being handed to an untrained actor. So, who are each of these decision makers, right? Who's making each of these decisions to cut these different corners? That's going to be coming out in discovery. E, chose not to require that all actors be trained in basic gun safety rules and in use of the specific revolver by the production's armorer before operating a firearm. So now number one, you've got the armorer's responsibility to train people, but then you've also got the responsibility of somebody to say, no, we have to make sure that everyone on set who is handling a firearm, regardless of whether they're an actor, an armorer, a prop person, whoever, anyone who is handling a firearm has to be trained in basic gun safety rules. The fact that there was allegedly no training in basic gun safety rules is bad for the defendants. Really, really bad for the defendants. F, they chose not to require all cast and crew to be protected against the risk of firearms at all times, in parentheses, whether by remote video monitors or shielding equipment. So that's also another point, is that, we talked about plexiglass. We talked about, physical barriers, but we live in a modern era, right? And they even, in Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's complaint for her civil lawsuit, she talks about how they actually had video monitors because they were concerned about COVID protocols or whatever. So they had people that had to be watching on video about to maintain eyes on what was going on scene. So they had that. Why didn't they use that for safety besides COVID safety? G, they chose not to require multiple inspections of every weapon handed to an operator, including Defendant Baldwin, to ensure such weapon was unloaded or free of dangerous ammunition and safe for operation in relation to the intended use of the weapon. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if that's true, that's bad. H, they chose not to ensure that the armorer was in exclusive possession of all weapons and ammunition at all times, except to the extent necessary for shooting scenes. They chose not to ensure all operators of a real revolver, including Defendant Baldwin, named specifically, had adequate training, background experience, and licensing involving such deadly weapons. And J, they chose not to investigate or reasonably respond to complaints, concerns, and reports of the cast and crew on the Rust production regarding weapon safety and take all action necessary to resolve such complaints, concerns, and reports, including shutting down or suspending the production, delaying the production, inspecting all weapons and ammunition on set, and auditing records to ensure all personnel were adequately trained in weapons handling and safety. So we're talking about not just investigating, not just, shutting down or suspending the production, delaying the production if necessary. They are literally putting money in front of Halyna Hutchins' life at the end of this. I don't think anybody we can't assume that people are making that decision consciously, like, oh yeah, of course we're going to put money in front of the health and safety of people on set. Of course we care more about money than we do about whether or not someone like Halyna Hutchins lives. Like, no one on the front end of that is probably thinking that. Probably. I would assume that. I'm not going to assume any sort of malintent where there is no evidence of it, right? But on the backside of this, it's easy to see that that's essentially what was happening. Where somebody is making these decisions to cut corners, and they're cutting some massive safety protocols. That's putting money before people, and that's a bad look. Theophrastus 3.0, thanks for your super chat. He says, if this happened in a military exercise, the commander would be responsible even if he didn't fire the fatal shot. If he did, prison would be likely. I mean, yeah, everyone who is in charge of either the person who's handling the weapon, or somebody who's just above them, or someone who's in charge of the weapon itself, or in charge of the ammunition itself, all the way up to the top is going to be held responsible. Because safety is a basic need on any set. Okay, paragraph 80. In addition to his acts taken as a producer, Defendant Baldwin recklessly or willfully committed the following acts and omissions. So, at the very least, recklessly, but also maybe willfully. A, chose to accept a weapon for use on the set from personnel who is not qualified to store, maintain, inspect, and handle deadly weapons. Talking about the assistant producer there, or assistant director, sorry, excuse me. B, chose to handle a real revolver during the lineup of a scene when a dummy or stand-in prop would have been sufficient. C, chose not to conduct or observe a visual inspection or loading of the weapon before taking possession of it, or otherwise verify that the revolver did not contain any dangerous ammunition. D, took intentional acts to allow the firing pin of the revolver to hit a bullet and cause the revolver to be discharged, including pulling or cocking the hammer and releasing the firing pin. E, pointing the gun at Halyna Hutchins and the cast and crew of Rust within a dangerous distance and without any personal protection for them. And F, recklessly caused a deadly weapon to discharge, which is a criminal offense in the state of New Mexico. There it is again. That's another reference to the New Mexico Criminal Code. Interesting that they've done that multiple times, specifically talking about Defendant Baldwin here. 81. Paragraph 81. Defendants Gutierrez-Reed and Seth Kenney negligently, intentionally, recklessly, or willfully committed the following acts and omissions. A, procured live ammunition and allowed the live ammunition to be used on the production of the Rust film. So not just procuring it, but also allowing it to be used. B, they failed to inspect each dummy bullet on the set of Rust to ensure that no live ammunition had infiltrated the supply of dummy bullets. C, they chose not to inspect the weapon that was handed. It says has handed. I think it was supposed to be was handed to Defendant Baldwin, which was loaded with live ammunition. D, Defendant Gutierrez-Reed did not accurately report and disclose the scope, nature, and extent of her visual inspection and misled the cast and crew regarding his inspection by purportedly saying, quote, cold gun, unquote, to cast and crew regarding the revolver at issue, knowing that she had not adequately inspected the revolver and individually verified each bullet contained in the revolver as being a dummy bullet and not a live bullet. E, he chose not to adequately train and supervise the cast and crew on the Rust production who were operating or in the presence of firearms. And F, failed to maintain or monitor the custody of all firearms and ammunition on the Rust film production. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. So, I mean, it's going all the way down to, all the way down from just procuring these rounds, and then also not inspecting them, you know, just generally speaking on set, not inspecting the ones that went directly into this revolver, not accurately reporting the fact that they are either hot or cold. Now she's probably going to dispute subparagraph D here, where it's talking about her, that she didn't accurately report and disclose the scope, nature, and extent of her visual inspection, because she's going to say, hey, I couldn't. They wouldn't let me. No one told me that they had started rehearsing for this scene, and no one told me that they had taken the revolver. Now, of course, it still is within her responsibility to make sure that no one else is touching that revolver if she is the only person that's supposed to be touching it, right? Because she's the one that's in charge of safety of all of the weapons. So, you know, and that's what's coming on here with subparagraph F, that she failed to maintain or monitor the custody of all firearms and ammunition on the Rust film production. Regardless of whether other people were stepping in and making her work that much harder, like I said before, she had two options: either fight to keep her job within only her control, or quit. That's all. That's what you got. Paragraph 82, Defendant Zachary. So Sarah Zachary, this is the person that is in charge of, technically, of Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. Defendant Zachary negligently, intentionally, recklessly, or willfully did not supervise Defendant Gutierrez-Reed and Seth Kennedy, says Kennedy again, a little typo, and otherwise provide a reasonably safe production set environment. Interesting. Very, very simple allegation against her. Okay. Defendant Halls negligently, intentionally, recklessly, or willfully committed the following acts or omissions. A, deliver the firearm to Defendant Baldwin without possessing the necessary background, training, and experience to perform this function. Meaning he's not trained to handle firearms on set. Boom, that's it. B, declared the revolver to be safe without disclosing his failure to fully check the weapon. Any reasonable person would have listened to what he said and said, okay, yeah, you checked it and it's cold. You know what you're talking about. Okay, cool. Let's move forward. He has the responsibility, if he's going to again, step into that role where he's saying, yes, I checked it, and yes, I know what I'm doing, and yes, this is a cold gun, and that's not actually the case. Any of those things are not actually the case. Liability. C, he did not inspect the weapon being transferred to Defendant Baldwin or witness an inspection of the weapon to assess its condition and determine whether any bullets loaded in the revolver were dummy bullets and not live ammunition. Hey, Aaron Catron, thanks so much for your super chat. Thank you. Super kind. Okay. let's see, that was, I believe, D. E, he did not reasonably investigate or respond to complaints, concerns, and reports of cast and crew on the Rust production regarding misfires, near misses, or weapon safety, and take all action necessary to resolve such complaints, concerns, and reports, including shutting down or suspending the production, delaying the production, inspecting all weapons and ammunition on set, etc., etc., and auditing records to ensure all personnel were adequately trained in weapons handling and safety. Paragraph 84, each of the defendants utterly disregarded the consequences of their actions and knew or should have known that his or her acts and omissions were substantially certain to result in injuries or death to cast and crew members, including Ms. Hutchins. So this is getting to they either knew or they should have known, and they ignored it. Talking about at least recklessness there. They knew or should have known. If they knew and disregarded, could be intentional, but at the very least reckless. Paragraph 85. Each of the defendant's acts and omissions were a direct and proximate cause of Halyna Hutchins' death and the resulting damages set forth below. So here we have element number 3 of the negligence claim, right? We've got 4 elements total. We talked about duty, we talked about breach of the duty, then we talked about harm, I guess, is the 3rd element. So we know that they've alleged that she died. Number 4, that it was a direct and proximate cause. Proximate cause is basically hinting at was this a foreseeable result of these issues? Is it foreseeable that an armorer who is not maintaining proper control over the ammunition and the weapons on set, that in not doing that, this kind of a harm could result? Well, of course, it's easy, right? We're not talking about, that someone, had some kind of a shock and then a heart attack and then died from that, like we're not talking about that, result because someone had a shocking heart attack because they saw this thing happening. That would be an issue of proximation, right? Proximate cause. We're talking about legal cause. We're talking about foreseeability. So what we are talking about is literally someone got shot because the weapons were not being watched. The weapons were not being inspected. The ammunition was not being watched. It was not being inspected. So that's just one example. So each of these defendants there has to be proximate cause between their particular breach and the actual harm that resulted. But I mean, all of these, it's pretty clear, right, that these kinds of problems are going to result in someone getting hurt from one of the weapons going off, because of the fact that everything is rushed. Everything is rushed means that safety becomes an issue. Safety becoming an issue on a set that is very gun heavy and set in the Old West. Yeah, that makes sense. So proximate cause, I think, is going to be relatively easy in this case. Paragraph 86, each of the Rust production companies, in addition to being directly liable, are vicariously liable for the acts and omissions of their directors, officers, members, managers, employees, and agents as alleged herein. And this is just kind of tying it all with a nice little bow, basically saying if one person is liable, then the rest of these guys are liable because they are all vicariously liable for the acts and omissions of one another because they're all trying to work on this project together. They all have the ultimate same aim. None of these breaches by any of these individuals or any of these production companies, none of these breaches are like any individual kind of going rogue and doing something for themselves, right? Like they're trying to work within the scope of their responsibilities for the jobs that they were hired to do. So, and the job that they were hired to do was on a grand scale to make this movie. Okay. That is the negligence, the wrongful death claim, the negligence, recklessness, intentional thing. So that's the wrongful death aspect. Now back to loss of consortium, which is the one that in my opinion, we've hopefully are going to get a little bit more color, a little bit more detail. Okay. Count 2, loss of consortium against all defendants. Once again, all previous paragraphs are incorporated herein by reference. Paragraph 88. Halyna Hutchins was 42 years old and had been married to plaintiff Matthew Hutchins for over 16 years at the time of her death. That is relevant. The length of their marriage is relevant because, you're not talking about somebody who, just met her husband like a year ago. That's been a decade and a half of marriage, which is, all of the wonderful things and the things that you learn along the way. Right. That's very relevant for a loss of consortium case. Halyna Hutchins and Matthew Hutchins had a loving, close, and dependent relationship. The proximity of their relationship is very relevant for this, for a loss of consortium claim. The nature of their close relationship gives rise to a loss of consortium claim by Matthew Hutchins, who, but for Halyna Hutchins' untimely death, would have continued to rely on her for guidance, companionship, assistance, and support throughout their lives. So essentially, no indication that they were planning on getting divorced anytime soon, right? They were planning on living the rest of their lives together. And that was cut short only because of this particular case. So, like I said before, the discovery requests that will come for this kind of a claim, they're going to be probing Matthew to see, were there any kind of issues that you guys were having in your marriage? How was your sex life? How was this? How was that? Let's talk about the arguments you guys were getting to, so there's all of that would be relevant because it would be kind of getting to the proximity of their relationship. It would be getting to, what kind of loving, close, and dependent relationship did they actually have? Did he rely on her for companionship? Did he rely on her for guidance for, when he comes home from work after a long day and he's fed up with his damn coworker in the next office that likes to eat carrots in the middle of the day and he can't stand the damn sound, like things like that could even be relevant. The fact that that they would be depending on one another, not just for, the physical intimate part, but also like the other aspects of marriage that are reasons for why you get married and stay married to someone for the rest of your life. All of that is going to be probed into in discovery. Paragraph 91. Halyna Hutchins was the mother of Andros Hutchins for over 9 years and had a close and loving relationship with her son. He would have continued to benefit from her love, guidance, and support, but for her death. And that one is, it's a lot harder to fight against a claim like that because it's kind of like by default, a kid that's 9 years old, they're probably not, and I see it in the chat about my reference to carrots. No, this is not. This is me having given guidance to friends who were dealing with that in their workplace. But no, this is not actually. I'm not anti-carrot. Carrots are delicious and very nutritious. But that's funny. But some people find that to be very, very annoying. And that's something that can really bother them at work. And they come home and they bring all of their work frustrations home. Right. So I added that just to sort of color how these things are, kind of play out in real life. Right. We all have those things that when you go into the office and, maybe there's just that person that's always like too peppy, or maybe there's that person that's just like very much like Eeyore. And you're just like, God, like, why can't you just be happy for a little bit, or something. And like, it brings you down, or there are people that are like, trying to sabotage you or whatever. That's always possible too. That's super fun. But anyhow, but yeah, anyhow, but that's you guys get what I mean, right? Because we're talking about like the ways in which spouses support one another over time. And it's not just like loss of consortium. A lot of times people talk about the physical intimacy aspect, but there's also the, like talking about reaching for certain goals that they have with their work or with their career, or, things that they want to accomplish in life. And you have a spouse, you ideally pick a spouse to, to help you, make those decisions. Anyhow, that's what I was getting at. Okay. Anyhow, and as it relates to Andros Hutchins, who's a 9-year-old, it's a lot easier uh for this one to not be quite as probing. I mean, of course, there's still going to be like there's still going to be probing questions into like, well, how much time did you really spend with your mom? Was she always away? That kind of thing. But I think it's a lot harder to like really fight against that because of course a 9-year-old is most likely going to be raised by parents that are together, like assuming that they're together, they're not divorced, like it's a single household. It's just kind of the default. Paragraph 92. Matthew Hutchins' loss of consortium with his wife, Halyna Hutchins, and Andros Hutchins' loss of consortium with his mother were directly and proximately caused by defendants. So that's pretty clear here that it's foreseeable that those kind of safety issues on set would lead to this kind of a result, and that therefore they would have lost a loving, close relationship with their spouse or mom. Paragraph 93. Matthew Hutchins and Andros Hutchins suffered loss of consortium damages to be determined by the jury at trial. And then the prayer for relief. So we're talking about compensatory damages, the fear, pain, and suffering of Halyna Hutchins after being shot by Defendant Baldwin and before she died from her wounds. So that they are separating that out from the loss of the value and enjoyment of her life, the fact that her life was taken away from her. That's even just those moments of pain are kind of separated out, delineated out in these kinds of cases. And then, of course, the loss of Halyna Hutchins' household services, the fact that when you have a spouse, you're sharing household, chores, tasks, and whatnot. Now we have a single father that is having to take on all of those tasks by himself. That is something that gets parsed out here in the compensatory damages. The loss of Halyna Hutchins' earnings and earning capacity. Now that is probably going to be the biggest bulk here. How much was she earning up to this point? How much was her income steadily increasing? For example, she was 42, so this is at a time when not necessarily somebody is making their peak earnings, but generally speaking, we're talking about people that are expected to make quite a bit, and probably for the next decade, I would say. And then, of course, funeral and burial expenses that they had to pay for her, aggravating circumstances surrounding the wrongful death of Halyna Hutchins, the loss of love, companionship, comfort, care, assistance, protection, affection, society, guidance, training, assistance, and moral support of Ms. Hutchins. Of course, that's going to the consortium damages. Punitive damages, an amount to be determined at trial, prejudgment and post-judgment interest, costs, meaning the costs of litigating, such other relief as this court or a jury may find appropriate. So basically, that is what they're asking for. It's a lot. And I think that based on that's the end of it. My reading of this complaint is that it's a very well drafted complaint. There are a couple details here that I would have liked to see a little bit more detail about, allegations of why Alec Baldwin should have known, for example. They could have alleged he's been on many film sets involving firearms. He should have known, but I don't think they even necessarily need that in this case. That they regardless of what his experiences were leading into this film, they're alleging he still had a bunch of responsibilities that he did not measure up to. And that's that. So my guess is that this probably is going to settle. And I would think that the defendants would want to settle it sooner rather than later. I have no idea how Alec Baldwin is going to respond. I would imagine, based on his behavior so far, that we would probably see something along the lines of some Instagram statement or some roadside statement from probing journalists or something on video with Hilaria, like recording on her cell phone by herself and like getting involved. But I think that if I were defense counsel, I would be trying to get this settled as soon as possible, because this is bad. It's bad from the looks of it. I haven't heard anything from any of the reporting saying that there was any measure of safety protocols on set here. Just a lot of people pointing a lot of fingers at one another, which doesn't really do much for actually shifting liability away from these people. What you're doing is you're just sharing liability. So you're ultimately just getting other pockets involved, as opposed to moving the liability away from you. So I think that all of these defendants that have been named are probably properly named. But I think, yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see. I, of course, would love to see this continue through litigation. I think it's a very interesting case, and I think that importantly, I think this is one of the reasons why I really have been talking about this case quite a bit, is that this is not something that's supposed to happen anywhere, regardless of whether, we're talking about firearms on a gun range, or firearms, out on the street, or firearms out on a movie set, right? This is not supposed to happen. Like, everyone can agree that this is not supposed to happen. And when we are talking about film sets, we are talking about a certain level of danger in a lot of different ways, right? Regardless of whether they're weapons or other elements. You can have electricity issues. You can have, I have a video on the Twilight Zone movie, where the helicopter crash killed a bunch of people in a very gruesome ways. And I think, when we have these situations where things go wrong on set, it's an indication that there's something in the industry that needs to change. And this is one of the reasons why I think that this is just so important, is because, regardless of what you think of Alec Baldwin, I'm trying to be fair to him, despite knowing his reputation. But at the same time, it's pretty crappy. It's pretty crappy when ego and budgets and schedules result in someone dying too soon. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing. So anyhow, those are my thoughts. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments below. I really enjoyed going through this. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you so much for being in the chat. Thanks for all the super chats. And I will see you guys in